The Common Core asks students to read stories and literature, as well as more complex texts that provide facts and background knowledge in areas such as science and social studies.
It is not easy to find common ground on the Common Core. This was believed to be the next big thing in education reform. The Common Core state standards were rushed into nearly every district in the county.
Students know that test scores affect their future lives, so they do anything to pass them, such as cheat or take performance drugs.
Standardized tests do not provide any feedback on how to perform better. The first interview is of Miss Blythe. She teaches AP Environmental Science, Physics, and Biology.
Do you believe standardized tests help students, parents, and teachers?
No. Standardized tests have to be standardized across the board, which means that they can't be open-ended questions. They have to have multiple choice. They have to have short answer. It's very difficult to see how thought processes work with a standardized test, so I don't think it actually evaluates anything meaningful. It's the only way that colleges, like the SAT, uses a standardized test to be able to rank their kids, but I don't really think kids should be ranked based on whether they're going to college. Somebody who's going into plumbing is going to need much different information than somebody who's going to go into rocket science.
All this for tests that are, in many cases, poorly designed or are being administered to identify which students are in danger of doing badly in other standardized tests. It is not time well spent if what you care about is kids learning to do anything other than take very specific tests.
How did you feel when the aspect of Common Core was brought up?
The legislation has been talking for many, many years about having a standardized system of education. Now, I taught in Maine, I taught in Alaska, and I taught in Florida, and the needs of the kids in Key West are much different from the kids in Alaska and are much different from the kids in Maine. So even though everybody should know how to do basic math, basic reading, basic writing, the topics are so wildly different that it's hard to standardize some of the other content areas. So agriculture in Florida is different from agriculture in Alaska, which is different from agriculture in Maine, so it's hard to teach straight out agriculture.
Schools saw their passing rates plummet when the Common Core curriculum became the basis of testing in 2013. But schools that were already struggling, especially those with many Black or Hispanic students, fell the most.
Do you believe test results help individual students do better in school?
Yes, I do think test results help students do better in school as long as the kids get the scores back in a meaningful time and can have the time to see what they did wrong and learn from the mistakes. The best way to learn is to make the mistake and then see it. So if you give these kids these tests, have them make the mistakes, learn from the mistakes, and then move on to teach them. The way standardized tests are given these days and the way these test scores are given is that the kids never even see what they got right and what they got wrong. The way we're testing the kids, not helpful at all.
Our second interview is with Miss Shear. She teaches yearbook and Spanish too.
Hi guys. So the question is, how do you feel about Common Core? As a Spanish teacher, it doesn't really affect me, so I don't really care. Do I believe standardized testing helps students? I do think it's an important skill for students to learn how to test. There are certain tests that one can't avoid. For example, the SAT to get into college, the GRE to get in grad school, the LSAT to get into law school. It's an important skill to be able to test. However, I do think that we've taken it a little bit too far. Third graders are sobbing because they don't think they can be promoted if they fail the FCAT or the FSA now. So I do think that that's a problem.
The third interview is of Mr. Forbes. He is the Health and Careers teacher.
I'm Mr. Forbes. If you don't know me, I'm one of the new teachers here at Key West High School, and I am the Health Science and Careers teacher. Come from the world of healthcare, and part of this interview was what was my opinion on some of these Common Core and standard testing. Like I said, I came from the healthcare industry as a critical care registered nurse and trauma nurse in a facility up in Orlando Regional. To my surprise, I have followed some of this testing for some time, and I am still overwhelmed at the amount of testing that students have to do.
Article 1 is from a parent's point of view on Common Core.
CNN published an article in November of 2013 named "Why So Many Parents Hate Common Core." Parents of New York State were not angry that they found out their child wasn't brilliant, but because most were told by the state that their children were failures. Only 31% of the state's students in grades 3rd through 8th passed the new tests. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan boasted that the Common Core standards were adopted by 45 states, but he did not mention that the states were required to adopt college and career-ready standards to be eligible for $4.35 billion from the Education Secretary's signature program called Race to the Top.
Article 2 is from a student's point of view on Common Core. New York Times published an article in June of 2014 named Common Core in 9-Year-Old Eyes. A 9-year-old student in Brooklyn once was a model student, the fastest counter in first grade. But last year, in the confusion of a new and more difficult set of academic standards known as the Common Core, he had failed the state tests in English and math, placing him near the bottom of the class. He thought he had grown accustomed to being underestimated and said, "If I don't pass the test, I will feel miserable and never come back." Article 3 is from a teacher's point of view on Common Core.
Gallup.com posted an article in October of 2014 called "Teachers Favor Common Core Standards, Not the Test." In their study, they found that 76% of U.S. public school teachers reacted positively to the primary goal of the Common Core, which is to have all states use the same set of academic standards. But most agree that testing students on the new standards is problematic and that linking those scores to teacher evaluations is unfair.
States are opting out of the standards, while teachers and parents are fighting for and against them.
A lot of people will argue that we need standardized tests, if only because we have no alternative method of measuring student achievement and making sure that all kids are getting a decent education.